While the market is getting oversaturated with brand new M.2 SSDs, each with a higher speed and a higher price, TEAMGROUP is still offering some modern SSDs that will not break your wallet completely, and the T-Force Cardea A440 is one of those. With a Phison-made controller, a dedicated heatsink to keep things cool, and TLC memory chips, this SSD looks to be a good choice, and in this review we shall see what makes it so. The TEAMGROUP T-Force Cardea A440, in our case the 1TB variant, is an M.2 SSD that sports a dedicated heatsink as well as an included graphene label, all this to keep the temperature of the Phison controller in check. When we talk about the pricing, this SSD can be bought for around $80 for the 1TB variant, and while it's not exactly cheap, it's cheaper than what the competition has to offer in many cases. The T-Force Cardea A440 is a regular M.2 SSD that uses the PCIe Gen 4x4 interface and is available in up to 4 storage variants: 1TB, 2TB, 4TB and 8TB. In this review we have the cheaper 1TB variant that is going to be the one to get if you're on a budget but still want a PCIe Gen 4x4 SSD. With the design of this SSD, well, there's a lot to say. First, this is one of those SSDs that has included a dedicated heatsink, and this heatsink is made from solid aluminum. TEAMGROUP advertises this SSD as having 2 heatsinks included, and they are correct. You get the aluminum heatsink and a graphene label which will add to the cooling of the SSD, but more of those later on. Going back to the aluminum heatsink, it's not the biggest thing in the world, and that's a good thing, especially if you have a large graphics card or a CPU cooler. In addition, some motherboards have large chipset and VRM heatsinks which may interfere with the SSD heatsinks, so keeping the heatsink itself moderate in terms of dimensions is a nice touch. The shape of the heatsink is good design-wise, with 6 fins and a black main color with gold accents and the T-Force logo as well. The included graphene label is just that, a graphene label, which we have seen that will help with the cooling of the SSD, and in our previous TEAMGROUP SSD review, this label brought down the temperatures by 2 degrees. It's not much, but it's something, especially if it's already included with the SSD. The control used on the T-Force Cardea A440 is made by Phison, and it is the model PS5018-E18. This is an 8-channel DRAM-based controller made on the TSMC 12nm manufacturing process. In the case of the T-Force Cardea A440 1TB, we have a single DDR4 DRAM chip installed. This chip is made by SK Hynix with the model number H5AN8G6N0J RX and C. The 1TB variant of the SSD has a single 1GB DDR4 RAM chip for the data tables, but it should be enough for general usage as well. As for the memory chips, this SSD is using Micron-made TLC 3D NAND, which are built on 96 layers and have the model number IA7BG948YA. This is great to see as most of the SSDs still use NAND flash memory chips made on 64 layers, so having them made on 96 layers is certainly a nice addition and upgrade. The testing platform used on all reviews going forward has a Z790 motherboard from Biostar, an Intel i7 13700K CPU and an RTX 3090 Supreme graphics card. The first test is a real-world test that involves copying large files from one folder to the next one on the same drive. This way we get a good idea of the performance of the SSD, the size of the cache, and how the SSD performs once the cache has been filled. First, we will copy the folder that contains 50 GB of data and essentially create a duplicate of it. And here you can see that the SSD is performing exceptionally well, with an average speed of 6 GB per second at the start, which will eventually drop to around 2 GB towards the end. Still, for 50 GB of files, starting at 7 GB per second is awesome. In the next test, we are using a folder with 100 GB of files. This way we can fully load the cache of the SSD and see how it performs. And here it starts off well enough at 7 GB per second, but then once the cache is filled up, the speed rapidly drops to 2.8 GB per second and then moves up and down between 2 GB per second and 3 GB per second. It's a good speed and shows a great recovery of the cache files. This behavior is respectable, as the speed remained constant within the 2 to 3 GB per second range and did not drop down to abysmal levels as is the case with many SSDs. And here is how the TeamGroup Cardea A440 1TB stacks up against the competition. First, with the 50GB file size, where it completely destroys everything on the graph, even high-end SSDs. Quite a good result for such an affordable SSD. The 100GB file copy graph is the same, as even with the file cache, the SSD manages a solid 2GB of file transfer speed, a thing which not many SSDs can do once the cache is filled up. Before we test this SSD further, we need to establish how good the included heatsinks truly are. Without any heatsink or the graphene label, the TeamGroup Cardea A440 1TB reached a temperature of 78 degrees Celsius with an ambient temperature of 20 degrees Celsius. However, with the graphene label and the aluminum heatsink installed, the temperature drops to 60 degrees Celsius and stays there even in heavy benchmarks, which is great to see. The first synthetic benchmark is Crystal Mark, now at version 8. This is a popular benchmark that is widely used for all types of storage devices, and here the TeamGroup TeamGroup Cardea A440 1TB is on the first position, slightly beating the almighty Silicon Power XS70 1TB, and this is the case for both the read and the writing tests. This is an outstanding display of performance from an SSD that is not exactly the most expensive SSD in the market. We continue with Atto Disk Benchmark, another popular benchmark used for storage devices. However, this one offers more data in its results, and thus it's a different way to measure the performance of an SSD. And here the TeamGroup Cardea A440 1TB is on the second position, losing to the Silicon Power XS70 1TB. While on the writing test, the SSD is behind its cheaper sibling, the TeamGroup Cardea Z440L 1TB. The final test is a video game loading test, and here we are using Shadow of the Tomb Raider, an older game that is still being played today. However, it's a good game to use for our testing purposes as it is stable and consistent in its results, and in this test, the TeamGroup TeamGroup Cardea A440 1TB is on the same position as the Crucial P5 Plus and the regular Crucial P5. Looking back though, at the experience with this SSD, I can say for certain that the TeamGroup TeamGroup Cardea A440 1TB is a great SSD. It performs exceptionally well thanks to the high quality components installed. Make no mistake, this SSD is competing with the high-end models from all the big manufacturers and does so at a lower price, at least for now anyway. The included heatsink and graphene label work well enough to warrant their usage. In terms of raw performance, this SSD is doing great and has the same level of performance if not better than other PCIe 4.0 and even PCIe 5.0 SSDs, although the last one is a bit of a stretch because it depends on many factors. But still, this TeamGroup Cardea A440 is a great choice for both gaming and workstation systems, especially at this price point. If you like this review, then you might consider subscribing for more, and if you want to support me in a direct way, then in the description below you will find the links for both the Patreon and Superstar pages of this channel.